Hello and welcome to this video on the 2024 Paper 1 predicted questions for the AQA GCSE psychology specification. So I'm going to start this video on predicted questions for the Paper 1 2024 GCSE psychology specification by saying don't bother looking at predictions, don't follow predictions, they don't help you and they could be a bit of a trap. Now I've got over that, the reason I'm still making this video is because if I don't make it, I think someone else will, and they might not put that warning at the start. And it might just be the reason I am going to look through it. You know, people that are interested in it, if it's going to help people to start looking at some of the other topics, then that's fine. Start thinking about what sorts of questions they can look at and maybe encounter some of the questions that they might not have encountered before because some of the topics haven't come up. So let's have a look. What I've done, I've gone through each of the papers from 2019, so it's just before the pandemic, and then gone up to 2023, so last year. And I've looked at what topics have come up, what topics haven't come up, and then based on that, had a look at, well, what might be more likely or less likely to come up. Now, that's an absolute guess. No one knows. Okay, so good start here. So this is looking at the memory topic, and you can see there that in 2019, types of long-term memory came up. The 9-marker was Murdoch's study, one of the named studies. There was a 5-marker on reconstructive memory evaluation. There was a 2-marker AO2 application question on interference and a 4-marker on application as well on context. So that tells you what has come up there. But if you look at that types of long-term memory, now types of long-term memory has come up in 2019, 2020, 2022 and 2023, so it only didn't come up in 2021. So you could say, okay, well, it's then maybe likely to come up in 2024. It's come up in most of the papers, so we know pretty much types of long-term memory is going to come up. The other way to look at it is to say, well, actually, it's come up so often before, then it's less likely to come up in 2024. So it's really difficult to know. Anyone that does make predictions, they don't actually know what's going on. And what tends to happen is people make predictions and they have something called confirmation bias. So there you go, a bit more psychology for you. So what confirmation bias is where things that support your view, you point to and say, look, it proves that I'm right, and things that don't. So what will happen is invariably some of the questions that I say here, they might well come up this year. And I'll say, oh, look, I was a genius. I was able to predict the questions that come up. Well, that's absolutely not the case. You know, you throw enough mud at a wall, something's going to stick. And so, yeah, some things will come up. But yeah, it's worth kind of looking at potentially. We can see here that the memory topic has had a couple of 9 markers. So multi-store model has come up. Bartlett's War of the Ghosts, and then linked to that reconstructive memory hasn't come up as a 9 marker. So that's one that might be worth looking at. As I say, am I making a prediction here? No. Yes, no. Prediction video, but it's something to look at, certainly as part of your overall holistic revision. That might be something to look at. Would you be able to answer a question on Bartlett's War of the Ghosts on reconstructive memory? So that's something to have a look at there. Murdoch hasn't come up as just an AO1, so I've said maybe it might come up. And then false memory. False memory hasn't come up that often. So could false memories come up as either an AO1, AO2, AO3 potentially, and those last 3 bits, interference, context, false memory, it doesn't look like they've come up as 9 markers either, so potentially something around that. So that's where we are for the memory topic. So what sorts of questions can come up then? So yeah, as I said, it would be worth looking at Murdoch. Murdoch might well come up, maybe not, but make sure that you can outline the primacy and recency effect. And yeah, make sure you're aware of what can come up around Bartlett, either the War of the Ghost study on its own or the theory of reconstructive memory on its own. The reason I put this in is because I think that second one, a study question, at least if you're talking about a study, you've got aims, methods, results, conclusions to talk about. Whereas if you're talking about the theory of reconstructive memory, it might be slightly trickier. So make sure you're prepared for that one. And then this is looking at that, as I said, some of those final ones could come up as context. False memory hasn't come up as a context study. Those that have looked at false memory, hopefully you're aware of the Loftus study, the Lost in the Mall study, where they try to implant false memory. So false memory is a memory that people feel exists but hasn't. In people, they said that they got lost in a mall when they were a child, when they didn't, and found that had an effect. I've put a hypothetical study here. It's a bit of a silly one. but looking at whether we can claim people have had a bad reaction to food and see if that changes their behaviour later on. So this is how it could come up potentially as an AO2 question, an application question. And then what you've got in there, I've put a couple of research methods. So I'll talk about research methods a bit later on, but it's well worth knowing what the IV, what the DV is. So you could get an application question on false memories. Okay, next, looking at perception. So this is what's come up previously, the last few years, last 5 years. You've got the Gilchrist and Nesberg and the Brunner and Midturn. So the name studies have both come up as 9 markers, and so has Gibson's direct theory. So you might be that Gregory's theory comes up. I've put that as certainly an evaluation you might want to look at. And emotion, so the effects of emotion and the effects of culture. Okay, they're not named studies, but they come up least often, certainly compared to motivation and expectation. Probably the reason for that is they have got the name studies on them in terms of motivation and expectation, but culture and emotion are still on the spec. They're worth looking at and worth exploring in a bit more detail. Types of visual illusions come up fairly often, hasn't come up in the last 2 years, so that might be worth looking at as well. So some of the questions you might want to look at, make sure you can really evaluate Gregory's constructivist theory of perception. Look at what research suggests about the impact of culture on perception. So that would be the Hudson study if you're looking at the Red Hair Guide textbook. So that's the one where they presented South African children, either white or black South African children who had been educated or non-educated, and found that their culture, their schooling and their background had an impact on the way they perceived someone with a spear and looking at antelopes and elephants and things like that. So that's certainly one worth looking at. Outline and evaluate research into the impact of emotion on perception. So if you've got a 6-mark outline and evaluate, it would be 3A1, 3A03. But again, make sure that you know emotion. This was the study with the taboo words, where they gave them neutral words and swear words, and they found that the galvanic skin response, their sweat glands, and the time that they took changed. So make sure you can outline and evaluate that. Not a name study, but you should be aware of some of the findings and the research that's gone into that. Okay, looking at developmental topic then, so in terms of the studies, what's come up as a 9 marker, so that would be the McGarrigle and Donaldson. The Hughes, I didn't find anything. Oh yeah, saying all of this, I might have misread some of these papers, so you might want to go back and double check, but I've tried to be as thorough as I can, but it could be that I've got some of these wrong, so just make sure that you've accounted for that as well. But yeah, I didn't see anything on Hughes, so Hughes' study could potentially come up. Piaget is a big part of this topic, and the schema theory, his theory, did come up in 2019, 2021, hasn't since, so could that come up? I've suggested there it might be an AO2, maybe an evaluation. Piaget stages come up quite often. Direct questions on the application of Piaget's theory to education is a bit lacking, so I've said maybe as a 9 marker. If you prepare for the worst, which would be a 9 marker, then you should be able to tackle any other questions that come up, as long as you're skilled in applying. Willingham came up in 2019, a couple of marks in 2021, but nothing since, so just be prepared for that as well. So the suggested questions following on from that: outline and evaluate the impact of Piaget's theory on cognitive development on education. So this would be linking his stages, the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. You need to be able to know how they link to education. So for example, in the pre-operational stage, you might want to help develop children's egocentrism, or try to make them less egocentric by doing role play games. In the concrete operational, children can deal with concrete information, so things like baking, concrete numbers, that could help develop that. The other area to that is looking at readiness, discovery learning, individualized learning. That's all of your AO1. The AO3 would come from supporting research, or research that kind of goes against. So you could bring Hughes and McGarrigle and Donaldson in here, so they both support Piaget's stage theory, maybe not directly linked to education here, so linking some of the other bits that do link to education would also be good in this one. Potentially you could use Piaget, not Piaget, Dweck and Willingham in there. And then I've given you a bit of an AO2, an application. Psychology teachers wish to use the knowledge and understanding they have of child development in their classroom. So this is Willingham. They praise the effort their pupils put into their work. They recover anything pupils may forget. They ask pupils to delay their gratification in exploring fMRIs to understand their pupils better. Again, bit of a silly scenario, but hopefully gives you a bit of a chance to look at what an AO2 question could potentially look like in terms of applying your knowledge and not just the pure knowledge in itself. Research methods is a difficult one. So lots of areas. Doing this task, going through all the papers, it made me realise just that bottom one, data and graphs. So, you know, your mean, median, mode, range, looking at data, calculating that data comes up really often. Graphs come up, so make sure you know the difference between a bar chart and a histogram. So bar chart is with discrete data, histogram, continuous data, scattergram as well. So if it talks about correlation or relationship, you need to do scattergram. 4 marks for those sorts of questions if you're asked to draw graphs. So one of those marks will come from writing a title. That is really commonly forgotten. Make sure you're accurately labeling your axes, that you're plotting your graphs correctly and choosing the correct graph. That's generally where the 4 marks come from. And lots of practice doing all of that data. What did come up here is that there are a couple of areas that haven't really come up. Again, I didn't really see anything on observations. I might have missed it, not been very observant. Get it? But I didn't see much come up, so an observation type question could come up. Reliability and validity, again, it's mentioned in the spec, definitely comes up on A level a fair bit. Not seen that much of it on the GCSE, may or may not come up. And again, things like case studies, they are on the spec, they come up every now and again. But just, yeah, the sheer amount of research methods. And of course, research methods can come up on paper 1 in any of the topics. It can come up on paper 2 as well. And that's what happened. And that's what this is here. That's why there's so many marks. I've included any question on paper 1 or paper 2 of that year that links back to research methods. So you can see they're getting quite research methods heavy. Experimental designs, again, I might have missed it, but I didn't see a great deal on there. So that could potentially come up. I haven't done sample questions for these ones, but you can look at your textbook, look at your past papers, and you should find that. I hope you find that interesting. As I say, don't just rely on predictions. They're not going to help, but having a conversation around sorts of questions that might not have come up, really helpful. Best of luck in the summer. I hope your exams go well for you.